So which championship clubs have over and underperformed so far this season? Let's find out. Guys, welcome back to another video on the channel. We've got quite an interesting one coming at you today. So someone has put together an XG table so that if expected goals were spot on throughout the season, how would the league table currently be shaping up? Now, XG in the football community is a bit of an opinion splitter. Some people swear by it, other people aren't so keen. I by no means think that expected goals is the be all and end all of football, but I do think it can tell us some interesting things about the clubs that we all watch in the championship. So if you don't know what expected goals is, it's defined as measuring the quality of a shot based on several variables such as assist type, shot angle and distance from goal, whether it was a headed shot and whether it was defined as a big chance. So what someone's gone ahead and done is applied the XG results to every game that's taken place in the championship so far this season, and it gives us a bit of an indication of where each championship side should theoretically currently be sitting in the league if XG was spot on. And I think that some of the results of this may surprise you a little bit, so if you do go to enjoy today's video, make sure to leave a like. Also, very soon around the corner I will be making my final championship predictions. If you're looking forward to that, make sure to smash a like on today's video. Do subscribe for a bit of regular championship content and check out the Patreon, link to that is down below. But without any further ado, let's jump into this one. So this table that we're going to be showing in today's video I got from @XGData on Twitter. Go and give that page a follow, it's really handy to have, especially if you are into sort of like the more analytical side of football and stuff. Really interesting stuff goes up on there. And so coming in at the bottom of the XG table, it is Wycombe, so this tells us that they are in and around where their underlying data would suggest them to be so far this season, coming in 24th. What I found to be quite interesting though is this table is a lot more congested than it is in real life. So Wycombe would actually have 35 points at this stage of the season if XG was 100% spot on. They'd have still have conceded around the same amount of goals, 58 according to this, but they would have scored a lot more. So in real life, Wycombe have only scored 23 goals so far this season. If XG was spot on, they would have scored at least 36. So that shows that some of their attacking players have been underperforming so far this season, given the quality of chances that they've created, which I found quite interesting. In 23rd place, we then have Sheffield Wednesday, so another one which is spot on so far. This isn't taking into consideration Wednesday's point deduction as well. So, I mean, realistically, we said going into this season that if Wednesday wanted to have any hopes of survival, and this was with the original knowledge of them having like a 12-point deduction, they would have needed to perform like at least a mid-table club for the vast majority of the season if they wanted to have any hopes of survival. That hope was slightly lifted a little bit when the point deduction got reduced to just 6 points, but even so, this underlying data for them is still really poor so far this season, putting them in 23rd place in this table. But perhaps one of the most interesting findings from this video is that XG table places Bristol City 22nd in the championship, which shows Bristol City's underlying numbers so far this season have actually been really poor, and they've actually overachieved so far this season to currently be sitting in mid-table. And I think that when you actually do have a bit of a deeper dive into Bristol City, this probably won't come as a massive shock to Bristol City fans who on the eye so far this season haven't particularly been a great watch. They average less shots per 90 than any other championship side. Added to that as well that Daniel Bentley, their goalkeeper, has made more saves than any other championship goalkeeper. They're not shooting a lot and they're conceding a lot of high quality chances. That's a bit of a recipe for disaster, and long term this is something that does need to be rectified with Bristol City. I know there's other circumstances to take into consideration, a change of manager partway through the season now, the amount of injuries that are built up there, but that underlying data is a little bit of a worry. Next up we get to Birmingham in 21st, who are performing how XG would expect them to be so far this season. This also places them 21st in the championship at this point in time. Similar story to Wycombe though, they'd have 8 more points in real life if XG was spot on so far this season. I can't help but feel like this has been such a disappointing year so far for Birmingham fans, given all the expectations coming into this season with Karanka, a pretty promising transfer window with some of the attacking reinforcements that they brought in. They've just not really delivered on any front so far, have they? Next up, coming in 20th place, we then have Luton, which may be a bit of a surprising one. So the XG table currently places them 20th in this league. However, what's important to note is they still have Luton picking up pretty much the exact same amount of points at this stage of the season. They're only lower in this table because a lot of the teams below them have been underperforming underperforming compared to their XG so far this season, if you're following along with me. I think it's been a real testament so far this season, the work that Nathan Jones has done, that we never really spoke about Luton for the vast majority of the season as relegation contenders. They've really built off that platform that they built for themselves last season. I think they deserve a lot of credit for that. And what we're going to see now with these next few clubs is basically why the reason that Luton have been pushed down this table a little bit. So Coventry still performing in and around where we'd expect them to be so far this season. The XG table places them in 19th, one place higher than where they're currently sitting in real life, but it would give them at least 5 extra points so far this season. Derby follow along on a similar pattern. The XG table places them 18th in the league, so one place higher than where they are in real life. What's most interesting about Derby and their underlying numbers so far this season is the amount of goals they've scored so far this season, or lack of goals actually. So far this season, Derby have only scored 25 goals so far this season, which is the second lowest return in the Championship so far this season. XG would have them scoring at least 36 goals so far this season, so that tells us that it's been their forwards in those attacking positions so far this season which have underperformed in terms of their XG. I mean, I can think back to quite a few of the sitters that Derby have missed throughout the season so far. That's obviously been the limiting factor with Derby so far this season. Following along with a similar pattern as well, Huddersfield also placed in a very similar part of the table. They're one place higher than where they are currently in real life on the XG table. This will have them placed 17th in the league, and it would have them picking up an extra 6 points so far this season. So especially what we're going to see when we get towards the top of the Championship is this table is incredibly squeezed together compared to real life where it's a little bit more stretched out. But perhaps one of the most interesting findings from today's video is that Rotherham come in 16th place in this table. Now, Rotherham so far this season have only played 32 matches, so they have those games in hand to catch up to those sides above them. And what this suggests here is that Rotherham have actually underperformed so far this season, and that their underlying data has actually been pretty decent, which could be a little bit of cause for concern for some of those other clubs who are currently in the relegation battle. Because if Rotherham do pick up and start performing at the level of which they're clearly capable of doing, we could see Rotherham have an absolute surge of points in the final third of the season, and that would leave one other Championship club in that bottom 3. In 15th place, we get a little bit more back to normality. That places QPR there, so one place higher than where they're currently sat in real life. If XG was 100% spot on, they'd have 2.4 more points than they currently do in real life. With QPR, what I think is most interesting is the amount of goals that they should have scored so far this season, so that places them scoring at least 40 goals so far this season, when in actuality they've only scored 34. I think that them underperforming their XG going forward was especially the case nearer the start of the season. You know, I can think back to maybe like someone like Lyndon Dykes missing a few sitters at the start of the season and that sort of thing, but I don't think that's as big of an issue now as it was earlier on, thanks to some of the loanees that came in throughout January. And once again with North End, XG has got us pretty much spot on so far this season in terms of where it would expect us to be currently placed in the Championship. This has us 14th, one place lower than where we are currently in real life. It's also got our amount of goals scored and conceded pretty spot on so far this season. This would have us picking up an extra 2.5 points at this stage of the season, but even so, small margins. Now this next one's a very interesting data set. This places Nottingham Forest 13th in the Championship. I think the most interesting thing to glean from this one is the amount of goals that they should have scored so far this season. So this has Nottingham Forest scoring at least 38 goals at this stage of the season, when in actuality they only scored 28 goals so far this season. That tells us that their forwards have been underachieving so far this season, which I think a lot of people would have probably guessed at. You know, we all saw the numbers that the likes of Lewis Grabban and Lyle Taylor were both hitting last season. It's not been the case with Forest this time round, has it? I think that was probably foreshadowed on the first day of the season really, when Lewis Grabban missed like 3 sitters on the opening day against QPR, but that's been a general trend that's continued throughout the season for Forest so far. Now this next data set is absolutely fascinating. This table places Swansea 12th in the Championship, picking up at least 15 fewer points at this stage of the season than they currently have in real life. Now, one thing that I think the vast majority of us and Swansea fans along with this have been saying about Swansea recently is on the eye test, they've not exactly been firing on all cylinders recently, Swansea, but they have still been picking up results. That's exactly what this XG table is suggesting right here. The underlying data hasn't been sparkling so far this season, but they've still been grinding out those results so far this season. I think the biggest area where they've actually overachieved so far this season is the amount of goals they conceded. So XG has them conceding at least 33 goals so far this season. They've only conceded 24. But it's going to be fascinating to see come the end of the season if a team with underlying data, which has been pretty hit and miss so far this season, you know, 12th in the Championship, right slap bang in the middle of the road, can get promoted automatically. It's going to be a fascinating climax this season. In 11th place on the XG table, that has Millwall there, which is spot on for where they're currently sitting in the Championship. This has them scoring a couple more, conceding a couple more than they have done in real life, but other than that, it's pretty spot on for them so far this season. It would have them picking up another 3.6 points at this stage of the season, but apart from that, it's got Millwall pretty spot on. Cardiff come in 2 places lower on this table than where they currently find themselves in real life. They're 10th on this XG table. If there's one manager in the Championship who's capable of taking a side up that goes against XG, it's probably Mick McCarthy. You know, we've seen this Cardiff side under him win matches 4-0, having under 30% possession. The most interesting point to note on this one is that they've exceeded their expected goals of just 43 goals so far this season by quite a bit actually. What that shows is that their forwards have been clinical so far this season, none more so than Kiefer Moore. In 9th place we then get to Blackburn Rovers, who come in with 7 more points on this XG table than compared to what they have currently in real life. I think this confirms what a lot of us have been saying about Blackburn recently. This would be sort of this area of the table that we expect them to be competing in at the moment. This suggests that compared to their XG so far this season, they have been underperforming. They should be higher up in the table. I think one of the most interesting things when it comes to Blackburn is, despite Adam Armstrong having a fantastic season up until this point, he's actually missed a lot of big chances. 17 big chances Adam Armstrong has missed so far this season. At times that can be a bit of a misleading statistic. I know that Bamford was by far and away at the top of that list last season, and we're all seeing how he's now thriving in the Premier League, but it's an interesting one to flag up nonetheless. Coming in 8th place we then have Barnsley, who have been on this incredible run lately, and the XG table has them placed in a fairly similar position to where they are currently in real life, so this would have them placed 8th currently in the league. They've been slightly overperforming their XG as of late. I mean that's to be expected really when you go on this incredible winning streak, but even so the data still is fairly close. We'll see if they can continue this incredible run in midweek with their game against Derby. Next up then we get to Stoke City, who the XG table would place 7th in the Championship currently, so 3 places higher than where they're currently sitting in real life. What I found quite interesting about the Stoke data was the amount of goals they've conceded so far this season. So XG would have them conceding just 33.3 goals so far this season, when in actuality at this stage of the season they've conceded 41 goals so far this season. What that could potentially be down to is them obviously having to chop and change the goalkeeper. There's one position in your team where you want some consistency. That's probably going to be your goalkeeper. Obviously Adam Davis was unbelievable at the start of the season. He then picks up the injury. Angus Gunn comes in for a bit. He gets injured. Joe Bursick comes in. You need the whole adaptation and settling in period for him. And now Angus Gunn most recently has been brought back into this side. So yeah, chopping and changing goalkeepers might not have helped Stoke in terms of their defensive stability. But overall the underlying data has been decent for them so far this season. Reading fans will be pleased to see themselves in the top 6, both in real life and on the XG table, especially considering at the start of the season they were vastly overachieving their underlying numbers. I remember, I think, did they win 7 of the first 8 matches I think in the Championship, and during that time, I mean, I'm not joking, they were pretty much scoring with absolutely every shot on target they were having. Lucas Jout, everything was ending up in the back of the net, and we were all sort of saying that there's no way this is sustainable unless generally the level of performance starts to level out a little bit and they do start to create a little bit more. Well, Reading fans will be thankful to know that as the season has gone on, those underlying numbers have caught up and they are now in and around performing where we'd expect them to actually be. So this has been a good season for Reading so far. XG would have them picking up 7.5 fewer points that they currently do at this stage of the season, but even so, still in a very similar part of the table. But as the first new side that we see jumping into the top 6, that's Middlesbrough, who the XG table places 5th in the Championship currently. Obviously in real life at this point in time, Middlesbrough currently find themselves 9th in the league, 7 points off the top 6. They're probably the last, maybe along with Stoke, of those sides that it would take like a miraculous run for them to make the top 6 from this point onwards, but they're still just about in the conversation. Well, it's interesting to know that the underlying numbers would actually place Borough in the top 6 this season. Middlesbrough have been fairly consistent so far this season actually when it comes to following along with their XG in terms of goals scored and conceded. The only reason they don't currently find themselves in the top 6 is because a lot of the teams that we mentioned below them currently have just been overperforming their XG drastically. And the next side that sneaks into the top 6 on this XG table is Bournemouth, obviously recently being knocked out of the top 6 for the first time this season. It's going to be, I mean, for me personally, I think the race for the top 6 is one of the most fascinating things about the league so far this season, but this XG table actually is quite interesting for Bournemouth because they've been fairly consistent with matching it throughout the season so far. This table right here would have them on 54 points. In real life they're on 56. Should some of the sides that are currently in the conversation for the top 6 manage to pip this Bournemouth Bournemouth squad with all the quality that's threaded throughout that team, I think this season will be seen as a massive failure for Bournemouth if that was to happen. Next up on the XG table, coming in third place, we have Brentford, around about where they are currently sat in the league, obviously one place higher than where they are currently. But the biggest overperformance from Brentford so far this season is the amount of goals they've scored. So from the opportunities they've created, XG would expect Brentford to score around 49 goals at this point in the season. They've gone ahead and scored 61. I think a whole portion of that has to be attributed towards Ivan Toney, who has been by far and away the best striker in the league this season when it comes to clinically finishing chances. For the vast majority of the season so far, he's been operating on a level where I think we've rarely seen at this level before, to be honest with you. But this one does paint an interesting picture, especially when we do get into looking at the top two. And so coming in second place, we then have Watford. That's exactly where they're sat in real life. So XG has been pretty spot on when it comes to predicting Watford and the outcome of their season so far. What we're about to see though with Watford and obviously Norwich in first place is what we were sort of mentioning with some of the teams at the bottom of the table. This XG table is a lot more squeezed together and congested than it is in real life, where it's still very close, but a lot more spread out than what we're going to see here. So Watford in the XG table would have 8 less points than they currently do in real life. I think that what we generally tend to see as top clubs, they generally tend to outperform their expected goals as they have better players, I think is the easiest way to explain it really. If we look at all the sides that are currently sat in the top 6, they've all outperformed their XG so far this season in terms of the amount of points that they picked up this season. So Swansea having an extra 15 points, Barnsley having an extra 5 points, Reading having an extra 7 points, Brentford an extra 5 points, and Watford an extra 8 points. And then coming in first place, as to be expected really, both in real life and on the XG table, we do have Norwich City. But like I mentioned before, this table, now you can see the full picture, is a lot more congested. You know, in real life we've got Norwich as very much the runaway leaders. In this table here, they only lead by 1.7 points over Watford. So XG would have calculated Norwich to pick up 16.3 fewer points so far this season than they actually have. So it's interesting that both Norwich and Swansea are outperforming their XG at a similar sort of rate really. The biggest area where Norwich are currently outperforming their XG is actually with the goals they've conceded so far this season. So with the quality of chances that Norwich have given up to the opposition so far this season, XG would calculate that they should have conceded about 39.9 goals on average so far this season, when in actuality they've only conceded 25 goals. Now that can be down to a few different variables really. Either the opposition that plays Norwich are always bad at finishing, Norwich's goalkeeper has been on top form so far this season, so whether that be Tim Krul or Michael McGovern saving more shots than they perhaps should do and having a really good season, or it could be a bit of a combination of both and the fact that Norwich actually pressed their opponents into making those mistakes in the box. I really think that this tells a fascinating story of the season so far, and Norwich in real life at the moment, both on the eye test and from looking into some of their data, look like an unstoppable force. But guys, as you can see to this side of me now, that is the completed table. So if XG was 100% spot on, this is what the championship would currently be looking like. So obviously this video today was just for a little bit of fun really, to look into sort of the underlying numbers of the clubs around the championship at this point in time. I found this sort of stuff really interesting. If you did go on to enjoy, make sure to leave a like. Also, please do subscribe for a bit of regular championship content. It is always massively appreciated. And as well as that, do check out the Patreon. Link to that is down below. But apart from that, thanks for tuning in guys, and I'll see you all in the next one.